Zola Mensa kept her smile intact even while her phone screen stayed stubbornly silent, like it enjoyed the humiliation. The restaurant was too bright, too polished, too full of couples who looked certain they belonged somewhere, and the empty chair across from her felt like an accusation with a neatly folded napkin. She checked the time again, then checked the message thread again, and the last text still sat there like a dare. I'm almost there was now 40 minutes ago, and the waiter's polite patience had begun to turn into watchful pity. Zola's stomach tightened, not from hunger, but from the slow realization that she had been set up to be a lesson for someone else's ego. She reached into her purse and felt the thin edge of a crumpled $5 bill, the last cash she had after a week of juggling rent, groceries, and bus fare. "Just water, please," she told the waiter, and her voice came out softer than she wanted. "Are you sure?" he asked, eyes flicking to the untouched menu. "I'm sure," she said, then forced a small laugh that sounded like it belonged to a stranger. A warm clink of cutlery and low conversation filled the room, but Zola heard only the hollow space where her dignity should have been resting. She stood, smoothing her simple black dress with careful hands, and the motion made her feel like she was folding herself back into place. "I'm sorry," she murmured to the waiter, because apologizing had become a reflex whenever the world disappointed her. "You don't need to apologize," he said, and the kindness in his tone stung worse than cruelty. As she turned toward the door, she felt eyes on her, not the casual glance of strangers, but a steady attention that seemed to measure the tremor in her shoulders. At the next table, a man sat with his back straight, shoulders broad under a dark tailored jacket, his face calm in a way that made the air around him feel controlled. He looked 35, maybe, handsome in the severe way some men were, with dark hair neatly styled and eyes that did not waste movement. His table was set with untouched food and a single glass, and he did not look like someone who waited for anything. Yet when Zola met his gaze by accident, he did not look away. His attention was not hungry, not playful, not disrespectful. It was almost protective, as if he recognized the specific kind of loneliness that pretended it was fine. Zola's cheeks heated, and she lowered her eyes, annoyed at herself for feeling exposed. Still, she sensed him rise, not abruptly, but with intention. "Miss," he said, voice low and steady, and she paused despite herself. "You dropped something." Zola looked down, confused, because she had dropped nothing. When she looked back up, he was already holding the door open, his expression unreadable, and she felt the strange pressure of being seen by someone who did not treat her like a joke. Outside, the night air hit Zola's skin like cold water, and she realized only then how hot the restaurant had been, how much she had been sweating under the quiet strain of pretending everything was normal. She started walking, head down, as if speed could erase what had happened, as if distance could make it stop being real. Behind her, footsteps matched her pace without rushing her, and that alone made her pulse quicken. In her experience, men who followed did not usually bring peace with them. "Stop," she said, turning sharply, her voice firmer than she felt. "Don't follow me." The man stopped immediately, hands visible at his sides, as if he understood the language of fear without needing it explained. Under the streetlight, his face looked even more composed, his jaw set, his eyes dark and direct. "I'm not here to scare you," he said. "Then why are you here?" Zola demanded, and she hated how her words shook at the edges. He held her gaze for a long beat, as if deciding how much truth was safe. "Because you were abandoned," he said simply, and the bluntness of it made her throat tighten. "That happens," she replied, too quickly, too defensively. "People are careless. People are cruel," he corrected, not angry, just certain. Zola folded her arms across her chest, an instinctive shield. "Are you offering sympathy?" she asked, and a dry edge slipped into her voice because sarcasm was easier than admitting she was close to tears. His mouth tilted, not quite a smile, more like a faint recognition. "I'm offering a ride," he said. "It's late. I don't get into cars with strangers," she shot back. "That's smart," he answered, and the agreement threw her off balance. He reached into his coat slowly, then pulled out a business card and held it between two fingers, not pushing it into her space. The card was simple, thick paper, minimal text. "Congratulations," she read aloud, because silence felt dangerous. Beneath his name was a number and nothing else. "That doesn't tell me who you are," Zola said. It tells you how to reach me, he replied. And it tells you I'm not hiding. Zola stared at him, trying to fit him into an ordinary category, but he did not belong to ordinary. He had the stillness of someone used to being obeyed, and the restraint of someone who could do damage without raising his voice. Why would you care? She asked, and the question came out quieter, more honest. He looked past her for a moment, scanning the street, then back to her, and his attention sharpened as if he had heard something she had not. Because you have $5 in your purse, he said, and Zola's breath caught, because she had told nobody that. And because you're walking like someone who thinks she deserves this, he continued, his tone controlled but not cold. Zola's anger flared, partly because he was right and partly because he had no right to be. You don't know me, she whispered. I know humiliation, he said, and for the first time his composure cracked just enough to show something darker underneath. He stepped back, giving her space again. I'm not asking you to trust me, he added. I'm asking you not to disappear into the night when you're this exposed. Zola swallowed hard, listening to her instincts argue with her exhaustion. If you try anything, she warned, because she needed to say it. I won't, he said, and his certainty sounded like a vow he expected himself to keep. Where do you live? He asked, and when she hesitated, he amended, or where do you want to be safe tonight? The word safe landed heavy in her chest, and it felt like a door she had been afraid to open. Zola did not tell him her address at first, not fully, not clearly, because she refused to hand her life to a man she did not understand. Instead, she gave him the name of a nearby 24-hour cafe, a place with cameras, bright lights, and people who stayed awake. He nodded as if he respected the strategy, and when he led her to a sleek black car parked close by, he opened the back door, not the front, creating distance that felt deliberate. A driver in a dark suit sat in front, eyes forward, silent as a wall. You're not alone, Zola said, trying to keep her voice neutral. I rarely am, Kong Jun Seo replied, and the admission felt like a warning wrapped in politeness. As the car moved, Zola watched the city lights slide across the window like blurred promises, and she kept her purse tight against her body, thumb resting on her phone as if it could save her. So, she said, because silence made her imagination too loud, what do you do, Kong Ju-seo? He took a slow breath, and she noticed the smallest pause before he answered. I run several businesses, he said. That's vague, Zola replied, and her dry tone surprised even her. His gaze shifted to her, steady and assessing, and she felt the strange sensation of being studied without being judged. Vague keeps people alive, he said, and the words sent a cold thread down her spine. That's an insane thing to say to someone you just met, she murmured. It's honest, he replied, and his voice lowered slightly. Honesty is what you needed tonight. Even if it's unpleasant, Zola's mouth opened, then closed, because she could not argue with that without lying. The car stopped near the cafe, lights washing the sidewalk clean, and Kong did not get out immediately. He watched the entrance, the shadows, the parked cars, like he expected trouble to step out of any corner. Are you in danger? Zola asked before she could stop herself, because his vigilance felt too practiced to be casual. Kang's eyes flicked to her again, and for a moment his expression looked almost tired. Danger is a constant, he said. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Zola's fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. And tonight, she asked. Kang's gaze sharpened. Tonight, he said, someone watched you in that restaurant. Zola's heart stumbled. People look at people. She tried, but her voice thinned. Not like that, Kong replied. Not with intent. Zola felt her skin prickle, remembering the way the date had insisted on that particular restaurant, the way he had pushed her to dress up, the way he had made her feel lucky to be chosen. What does that mean? She asked, and the question came out small. Kong leaned forward slightly, the movement measured, controlled. It means your humiliation may not have been the whole plan, he said. Zola swallowed, anger and fear twisting together until she could not tell them apart. Why would anyone plan this? She whispered. Kang's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath it now. Because you are beautiful, he said, and Zola flinched at the bluntness. And because people think beauty is a door they can push through, he continued. His gaze held hers, not flirtatious, but fierce in a protective way that made her chest ache. I don't want anything from you, Kong added, as if he heard her suspicion forming. I want you to walk into that cafe and stay visible while I find out who is watching. Zola stared at him, caught between gratitude and terror. Why would you do that for me? She asked again, because her mind needed a reason it could hold. Kang's voice softened just slightly, and that softness felt more dangerous than his hardness. Because I couldn't look away, he said, and the quiet confession landed between them like a match near gasoline. Inside the cafe, Zola chose a table with a clear view of the door, the counter, and the street beyond the glass, and she hated how quickly her body adapted to survival mode. Kang remained outside at first, speaking to his driver in Korean, the words too low for her to catch. His posture relaxed while his eyes stayed sharp. When he finally entered, the temperature of the room seemed to shift, not because he demanded attention, but because he carried it like gravity. He sat across from her without crowding her, leaving the space between them intact, and a waitress approached with nervous politeness. "Tea," Kang said, then glanced at Zola. "What do you want?" "Coffee," Zola answered, then added, "Black," because she needed the bitterness to feel awake. The waitress hurried off, and Zola tried not to stare at the faint line near Kang's knuckles, a healed mark that suggested violence had once been close enough to touch him. "You said someone watched me," Zola began, keeping her voice low. "How do you know?" Kang's gaze moved slowly across the room, then to the reflection in the window. "Because I know what hunting looks like," he replied. Zola's stomach clenched. "Hunting," she repeated, disbelief cracking into fear. Kang's eyes returned to her face, and his expression was controlled, but not indifferent. "Listen to me," he said. "Tell me about the man you were meeting." Zola's pride tried to resist, but the word pride felt stupid when her safety might be on the table. "His name is Darren," she said, and the name tasted sour. "We met through a friend of a friend." He seemed normal. Kang's jaw tightened slightly, and she caught it, the micro-expression of restraint. "Normal as a costume," he said. Zola let out a small, humorless laugh. "You would know," she murmured, and she expected him to bristle, but he did not. "Yes," he said quietly. "I would." The drinks arrived, and Zola wrapped her hands around her cup, letting the heat steady her. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," Kang said. "You tell me what you noticed tonight." Zola blinked. "I noticed I felt stupid," she admitted. "I noticed the waiter looked sorry for me. I noticed every couple in that room looked like they were judging me." Kang's gaze sharpened, but his voice stayed gentle. "Not feelings," he corrected. "Details." Zola inhaled, forcing her mind to rewind like film. "He insisted on this place," she said slowly. "He kept asking if I came alone. He asked if I had a boyfriend, and he laughed when I said no. He wanted me to sit facing the room, not the wall." Kang's eyes darkened at that, and for the first time Zola saw something openly dangerous flicker across his face. "He positioned you," Kang said, more to himself than to her. Zola's pulse quickened. "What does that mean?" Kang leaned back slightly, as if containing an impulse. "It means someone wanted you visible," he said. "And it means someone wanted to see what would happen when you were left there." Zola's throat went tight. "This is insane," she whispered. Kang's gaze held hers, and the intimacy of his attention felt like a shelter and a spotlight at the same time. "I know it's terrifying," he said, and the softness of that sentence made Zola's eyes sting. "But you are not alone in it now." Zola stared down at her coffee, fighting the urge to cry in public again. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know enough," Kang replied. "You didn't beg. You didn't scream. You carried yourself out with dignity when most people would have collapsed." Zola's laugh came out shaky. "Dignity," she repeated. "I had $5. Kang's eyes softened in a way that made her chest ache. "And you still didn't take what you didn't want," he said, voice low. "That matters." The words did something to her, loosening a knot she had been carrying for years. Zola lifted her eyes, and their gaze locked, and for a brief moment the cafe noise faded into background static. "Why are you really watching out for me?" she asked, and this time the question was quieter, almost pleading. Kang's expression held steady, but his voice dropped into something more intimate. "Because I saw you trying to be invisible," he said. "And I know what happens to invisible people." Zola's breath caught. "What happens?" she asked. Kang's eyes did not leave hers. "They get taken," he said, and the bluntness of it made the room feel suddenly smaller. Kang stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor, and Zola's heart jumped as her body prepared for impact before she even knew what the threat was. He moved with controlled speed toward the counter, speaking briefly to the cashier, then turned his head slightly as if listening to someone through an earpiece Zola had not noticed. Zola's fingers tightened around her cup until the heat bit her skin. "Kong," she called softly, and when he looked back, his eyes were calm but urgent. He returned to her table and lowered his voice. "We're leaving," he said. Now, Zola's pulse hammered. "Why?" she whispered. "Because the same man who watched you earlier is outside," Kong replied. "And he is not alone." Zola's mouth went dry. "Call the police," she said immediately, because that was the rule she had been taught. Kang's gaze held hers, and there was something tragic in how quickly he answered. "Police don't arrive fast enough for certain kinds of problems," he said. Zola's fear sharpened into anger. "That's not an excuse," she hissed. Kong leaned closer, not touching her, but closing the distance enough that his presence wrapped around her like a coat. "It's not an excuse," he agreed. "It's reality," Zola swallowed, eyes flicking to the window, where she could see vague shapes near the parked cars. "What are they going to do?" she asked, voice trembling despite her attempt at control. Kang's expression tightened. "I won't let them touch you," he said, and the certainty in his voice startled her more than any threat. "You can't promise that," Zola whispered. Kang's eyes softened, and his voice lowered into something that felt like confession. "I can," he said, "because I know their world better than they know mine." Zola stood, knees unsteady, and Kong gestured toward the back exit, guiding her without grabbing her arm, as if he understood how touch could feel like theft when you were scared. The kitchen smelled like oil and heat, and the staff looked up in surprise as Kong moved through like he owned the air. A cook started to protest, then stopped when Kang's gaze met his, and Zola saw how power could silence people without raising volume. They slipped out the rear door into an alley lit by a single buzzing lamp, the cold air slicing into Zola's lungs. "Stay close," Kong murmured. "But don't cling," he added, almost dry, almost gentle, and the faint humor steadied her for half a second. Footsteps echoed at the far end of the alley, and Zola's breath turned thin. "Kong," she whispered. "I can't do this." Kong glanced at her, and in that brief look she saw tenderness held tightly behind discipline. "You can," he said. "Because you already are." His driver appeared from the shadows as if summoned by the night itself, opening the back door of the car. "Get in," Kong told her. Zola hesitated, then climbed inside, heart pounding, and the leather seat felt too expensive for someone who had counted coins that morning. The door remained open because Kong did not get in immediately. He stood half outside, scanning the alley, posture relaxed in a way that looked impossible under threat. A man stepped into view near the street, and even from the car Zola sensed the menace in his stance. Kang's gaze locked onto him, and the air seemed to tighten. The stranger said something Zola could not hear, but she saw the grin, the casual cruelty of someone who enjoyed fear. Kong responded in a low voice, controlled, and the stranger's grin faltered. Zola's chest tightened as she realized Kong was not bluffing, not performing. He was negotiating with danger like it was familiar. Kong slid into the car finally, closing the door, and only then did Zola realize her hands were shaking violently. "Look at me," Kong said, voice calm. Zola forced her eyes to his, and the intensity there made her feel both terrified and strangely held. "Breathe," he instructed. Zola inhaled, then exhaled shakily. "Who are you?" she whispered again, because she needed to know what kind of man could stand between her and predators without flinching. Kang's eyes stayed on hers, and his answer came out like a truth he rarely offered. "I'm the man they don't want you to meet," he said, and as the car pulled away, Zola realized the night had changed shape around her, turning her humiliation into a doorway she had never meant to open. The car did not stop at her apartment, and Zola noticed immediately, her body tensing even though she told herself she had already accepted how far this night had gone. Kong sensed the shift without her saying a word, his gaze flicking to her reflection in the window. "Not your place," he said quietly. "It's compromised now." Zola swallowed, exhaustion and fear tangling until resistance felt pointless. "Then where?" she asked. Kong hesitated just long enough for honesty to register. "Mine," he said. "It's secure." The city thinned as they drove, buildings giving way to quieter streets and guarded gates, and when the car finally passed through a private entrance monitored by cameras, Zola felt the weight of crossing another threshold. Inside, the space was unexpectedly calm, Warm lighting instead of harsh luxury, clean lines softened by wood and fabric. It felt lived in, not staged, and that unsettled her more than extravagance would have. Kong gestured for her to sit, then poured water himself, placing the glass within reach, without touching her. "You're safe here," he said. Zola laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief. "You keep saying that," she replied. "I keep meaning it," he answered. Silence settled, thick but not empty, and Zola became acutely aware of how close he was, of the quiet way his attention stayed on her even when he looked away. "Why does this feel like a line I can't uncross?" she asked, more to the room than to him. Kong turned fully toward her then, his voice low. "Because it is," he said. "Once you step into my world, it doesn't pretend to be harmless." Zola met his gaze, heart pounding. "And yet you brought me here," she said. Kang's expression softened, and something vulnerable surfaced beneath the control. "Because leaving you alone tonight would have been worse," he replied. The truth of it settled between them, heavy and intimate. Zola exhaled slowly, her shoulders finally sagging. "I don't know how to exist in a world like yours," she admitted. Kong moved closer, careful, as if each step was a question. "You don't have to know tonight," he said. "Just rest." His hand hovered near her arm, not touching, waiting. Zola surprised herself by closing the distance instead, her fingers brushing his sleeve. The contact was light, tentative, but it sent a current through both of them. Kong inhaled sharply, his restraint visible. "Zola," he murmured, her name sounding different in his voice, grounded and careful. "If I touch you," he continued, "it won't be casual." Zola's pulse raced, fear mixing with something warmer, something she had not expected to feel so soon. "I don't want casual," she said softly, and the honesty of it left her exposed. Kang's hand finally settled at her waist, firm but gentle, anchoring rather than claiming. Zola felt the steadiness of him seep into her, calming and dangerous all at once. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, his forehead resting briefly against hers. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. Zola closed her eyes, breath trembling. "Don't," she replied. The kiss was restrained at first, careful, as if both of them were afraid of what it might unlock. Kang's lips were warm, unhurried, and when Zola responded, the tension between them eased just enough to deepen the contact. Her hand rose to his chest without conscious thought, feeling the controlled strength beneath the fabric, and Kong exhaled against her mouth, a sound that felt like permission. The kiss grew surer, not rushed, not desperate, but weighted with everything they had not said. When they finally parted, both of them breathed a little harder, foreheads still touching. Kong rested his thumb lightly along her jaw, reverent rather than possessive. "This complicates things," he said quietly. Zola let out a shaky laugh. "Everything tonight is complicated," she replied. Kang's gaze softened further, something protective and tender replacing the edge. "You should sleep," he said. "I'll stay close," Zola nodded, exhaustion crashing over her now that adrenaline had somewhere to land. Kong led her to a guest room that felt anything but temporary, then paused at the door. "I'll be right outside," he said. Zola hesitated, then reached for his hand. "Stay," she whispered, not demanding, just asking. Kong searched her face, weighing responsibility against desire, then nodded once. "I'll stay," he agreed. Morning light filtered in softly, and Zola woke with the unfamiliar sensation of peace. Kong seated nearby, jacket gone, sleeves rolled up as if he had been there all night. He looked up when she stirred, relief flickering across his face before control returned. "Did you sleep?" he asked. Zola nodded, then smiled faintly. "Better than I expected," she said. Kong stood, offering his hand to help her up, and this time she took it without hesitation. The day unfolded quietly, conversations low and honest, Kong explaining just enough of his world to make its dangers clear without glorifying them. Zola listened, asking questions that surprised him with their insight. "You don't belong in the shadows," he told her at one point. Zola met his gaze steadily. "Neither do you," she replied. That night, danger pressed close again, threats surfacing like reminders of the cost of proximity, but Kong handled them with decisive calm, never letting Zola feel like collateral. In the aftermath, the tension broke into something raw and undeniable. Kang pulled her close, his restraint finally loosening as fear gave way to need. Their kiss this time was deeper, hunger edged with reassurance, hands finding familiar places, as if they had always known each other. Zola pressed her forehead to his, breath unsteady. "Promise me something," she said. Kang's eyes held hers. "Anything," he replied. "Don't disappear into the darkness," she said. Kang nodded slowly, sincerity grounding his voice. "Then stay," he answered. Zola smiled through the ache in her chest. "I already am," she said. The final kiss was unhurried, full of quiet certainty, the kind that did not erase danger but chose love anyway, and in that moment, surrounded by earned calm rather than borrowed safety, both of them understood that what had begun as humiliation had ended in choice, and that choice felt like peace.